Welcome to this unusual and fascinating event here at the State Library Store. A conversation about the Philokalia, the foundational anthology of the Orthodox Church. I'm telling you as if you don't know. With renowned translator Dr. Jonathan Zecher, the very Reverend Dr. Doru Costache, and moderated by Professor Matthew Crawford. But first of all, I would like to acknowledge on behalf of Readings Books and State Library Victoria that we're gathered here on the lands of the people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung people, the original custodians of this land. And we pay our respects to their elders past and present and to emerging leaders as well. And we acknowledge that the long-standing tradition of storytelling that has taken place on this land and the privilege to continue that storytelling. We also extend that acknowledgement to other First Nations people that are here with us. I'd like to hand over now to Professor Matthew Crawford to lead tonight's conversation with the translator Dr. Jonathan Zecher, and the very Reverend Dr. Doru Costache, and we should have time for a few questions from yourselves before we finish. Just to introduce Matthew, Matthew is a Fellow of the Australian Academy of Humanities and a Professor at the Australian Catholic University, where he serves as Director of the Research Centre in Biblical and Early Christian Studies within the Institute for Religion and Critical Inquiry. Please welcome Professor Matthew Crawford.
Will allow me to add my welcome to you all and to thank Lawrence and the rest of the staff here at Readings for granting us the use of this wonderful location for tonight's event. We're delighted that you all could join us this evening to celebrate the launch of this important new book, translated by my ACU colleague, Associate Professor Dr. Jonathan Zecher. For this evening's program, we will shortly have a speech from a distinguished guest, followed by a brief response from Dr. Zecher. There will then be time for discussion with the audience. Please be thinking of questions you might like to ask when we come to that point. Once we have wrapped up the formal part of our program, we will then all move next door to the moat for what I'm sure will be a delightful reception. My task now is to introduce our two speakers. Dr. Zecher joined us at ACU in 2017 after having completed his doctorate at the University of Durham in the United Kingdom and serving as a lecturer in the Honors College of the University of Houston in the United States, where he won awards for teaching excellence for his courses on great books, religious studies, and ancient medicine. He's published widely on ancient Christian monasticism, including 2 monographs from Oxford University Press in 2015 and 2022, one on the role of death in ancient ascetical theology, and the other on the appropriations of medical knowledge for the purposes of spiritual direction in ancient monasteries. Dr. Zecher is the co-director of the International Scholarly Network, Religion, Medicine, Disability, and Health in Late Antiquity, and he is a chief investigator on a project funded by the Templeton Religious Trust titled Scholia Seeking Understanding. Dr. Zecher is also very active in public engagement and has run public events at the NGV and a walking tour of the Stations of the Cross in Melbourne CBD just last year. His 2020 article for The Conversation on the monastic concept of Arcadia was read more than any other article that year on The Conversation, no doubt because he captured so well the experience so many of us were having in the early days of the pandemic lockdown. The book we are launching this evening has been long in the works. Dr. Zecher was already underway on the translation project when he joined us at ACU in 2017. I can remember him mentioning it to me then, and we've all been waiting with anticipation since that point for its publication. It therefore brings me great joy to be celebrating its completion with you all this evening. You'll hear more from Dr. Zecher in a moment, but allow me now to introduce our distinguished guest who is formally launching the book for us. The very Reverend Professor Doru Costache is Professor of Theology and Spirituality at Nisibis Assyrian Theological College in Sydney, where he also serves as Principal and Academic Dean. Professor Costache is a proto-presbyter in the Romanian Orthodox Church and currently ministers to St. Gregory the Theologian Orthodox Mission in Sydney's north. He has over 30 years of experience in tertiary education, having taught at the University of Bucharest, St. Andrew's Greek Orthodox Theological College in Sydney, and St. Cyril's Coptic Orthodox College, also in Sydney. Somehow, Professor Costache also finds time to be a prolific author with over 100 published book chapters and journal articles, in addition to multiple books. His interests range widely across the centuries of ancient Christianity and the Byzantine period, including most notably expertise in science and religion. In works such as Nature Contemplation in Clement of Alexandria and Humankind and the Cosmos, Professor Costache has demonstrated that while science and religion have often been assumed to be the enemies in the modern period, ancient Christian theologians and ascetics place great value on investigation of the natural world as a way of ascending to the divine. He has also been publishing for decades on the tradition of spirituality that is captured in the Philokalia, so there is truly no one in Australia better suited to be with us this evening to launch this new volume. Professor Costache, thank you for joining us. I now hand the floor to you, and please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you, Professor Crawford. This will be a stroll in the zone of Philokalia, twilight zone if you like. Going first a bit historically and then personally. I hope you won't mind that. But before anything, I bring good news. I'm a Christian priest, and I'll say, because we are still in the season, Christ is risen.
He really is risen.
Oh, wow. It's an honor and indeed a pleasure to be given the opportunity to speak on a topic that is extremely dear to me, the Philokalia, and to launch this new translation of representative parts of it. Warm congratulations to Professor Jonathan Zecher and to Emeritus Professor Father Andrew Louth, two eminent scholars and Orthodox colleagues whose research I admire immensely and who led this worthy translation project to fruition. Just for the record, the Philokalia is a collection of spiritual treatises written mainly in Byzantine Greek. If there are any words you need me to explain, please let me know. From the 4th to the 15th century, in places ranging from Assyria to Egypt to Sinai to Palestine, the Greek islands and continental Greece. More than 1,000 years of spiritual literature. The Greek word Philokalia means etymologically love of beauty, where beauty denotes, at least within this context, important existential outcomes of the spiritual journey. The word also means collection or anthology, as our translators prefer. In this case, an anthology of treatises exploring the ascetic path leading to one's beautiful transformation into a noble, gentle human being. The collection was put together in Mount Athos in Greece's northern part in the 18th century and was published in Venice, Italy in 1782. The production expenses being covered by a Greek philanthropist who incidentally reigned over one of Romania's medieval principalities. Yeah, not a shady person, as you guys say in the introduction. Shadowy figure.
Different kind of shady.
Okay. The editors of the Philokalia, known through traditional channels since the first release of the massive volume doesn't even mention them, were a monk, St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain, and the former diocesan bishop, St. Macarius of Corinth. Both were interested in writings that mapped a spiritual experience known as hesychasm, isichasmos, as the Greeks would say, from ησυχία, tranquility, an experience to which I usually refer as the Byzantine way of serenity. Their interest transpires through the original title of the collection, which runs as follows. Philokalia των ιερών νηπτικών συνεραϊστήσα παρά των Αγίων και Θεοφόρων Πατερών ημών, εν ίδια της κατά την πράξη και θεωρία νηπτικής φιλοσοφίας, ο νους καθαίρεται, φωτίζεται και τελειούται. In my translation, I don't like this. The Philokalia of the Holy Awakened Ones, collected from our saintly God-bearing fathers, whereby the mind achieves purification, enlightenment, and perfection through the practice and contemplation that pertain to ethical philosophy. In short, a guide for people who seek awakening and awareness of themselves and reality by progressing on the path to perfection. Nevertheless, the readers of the introductory study, where the translators provided much more information than I can afford to share now, will discover, perhaps with surprise, that the Greek quest for compiling the Philokalia was not the only endeavor of this sort in the 18th century. It was preceded by the efforts of St. Paisi Velichkovsky, a Ukrainian monk. You say that.
Yeah,
Give it up. A Ukrainian monk who was mandated by his spiritual father, another Ukrainian monk, St. Basil of Poiana Mărului in Romania, to go to Athos and to gather the literature that would inform their spiritual quest. Paisi and his team, however, did more than collect relevant treatises. They translated them into Slavonic, in which version they became accessible to a much wider audience throughout Eastern Europe. Indeed, the Greek Philokalia did not make a dent immediately. Its language was no longer understood. What our the translators don't say, a matter that troubled me deeply, is that before either of the two large collections, Greek and Slavonic, were made available to readers, one of Paisi's disciples, a Romanian monk named Raphael, published a Romanian translation of several Philokalic writings in 1769, before the release of either of the two major anthologies. The first translation of the Philokalia into a modern language. This omission of the translators troubled me because, you see, I'm Romanian. I'm proud of it. But just in case you are taking me too seriously on this count, please don't. Anyway, Raphael's achievement is the Philokalia of Dragomirna. That's a monastery in northern Romania, of which the sole manuscript is preserved in the library of the Romanian Academy. I believe that Jonathan and Father Andrew, our translators, should have been more sympathetic to Raphael's efforts, as he aimed to do what they did, namely translate representative samples from the Philokalia. So, colleagues, brothers in arms. But the introduction of our translators did us a great service by showing the wide impact of the Philokalia, going through its translations into various modern languages, from Russian to French to English, missing Romanian again, to the delight or sorry of many readers, depending on what they have been or are still seeking. For the Philokalia, including the selection presented here, is not for readers who expect ancient and medieval spiritual writings to assure them that they are okay and that they can go back to sleep. The Philokalia is trouble, trust me. What I didn't know before being invited to launch this book is that Jonathan and Father Andrew are troublemaker revolutionaries too. After all, they retranslated parts of the Philokalia, rendering them in the best English version to date. Honestly, I can read this one myself. It would be remiss of me at this juncture not to respond to a silent question some attendees might have. Well, this was just in case some of my friends would be around. As to why on earth I was invited to launch this book. Truth be told, many fellow Orthodox see me as a rebellious figure with socialist leanings, that's that, and whose opinions about traditionalism are extremely critical. I want to assure them that I'm the right person for this book launch, as my views of the Christian tradition draw on the Philokalia. And if there's something that can blow up certain assumptions of Orthodox Christianity, with its ethnic nostalgias, obstinate ritualism, and anachronistic stances like how to calculate the date of Easter, for example, I can add more. Incapacity to speak truth to power. Horrible servile attitude to the powers to be. Misogyny. And so on and so forth. By the way, good on you, Jonathan. You have translated one of the best things that the Philokalia has to offer. Maximus the Confessor's chapters on love, where you read quite early in the book, hopefully, that someone who is on the path of spiritual transformation actually should develop such a kind heart that such a person considers everyone equally and loves everyone and can put her or his life for everyone, regardless of who they are and how they live. Thank you. So, if there's something that can blow up certain assumptions of Orthodox Christianity, that's the Philokalia. The Philokalia is a revolutionary manifesto which changed many lives. Jonathan and Father Andrew are its obvious victims. No wonder that the Orthodox themselves, who claim that the Philokalia belongs to them, don't read it. Just recently, during an ABC radio national broadcast, an Orthodox interlocutor replied to my Philokalic message, saying that Orthodox Christianity is not about ascending the mountain, namely undertaking the spiritual journey. To which I say, curious, just curious, and most curious. It's not about it. I'm quite certain that Jonathan and Father Andrew didn't embrace Orthodox Christianity because of bell tolling and the inanities of our basic catechism. As the original introduction of the Philokalia goes, a text that this translation fortunately includes, the time had come then in the 18th century, the time had come for the Orthodox, for Christians in general, dare I say, to rediscover the way of serenity through ascesis, spiritual exercises, contemplation and prayer, without which the external trappings of traditionalism amount to nothing and in fact stifle one's personal fulfillment. Now you see why they call me a socialist. By the way, this is an excellent reason for the people here present to buy a copy of this book. If they aren't believers, they will find in the Philokalia useful hints for transcending the bleakness of the 9-to-5 rhythms, which are usually followed by attempts of drowning the self into the sea of oblivion. And if the attendees of this event are churchgoers who had enough of the usual liturgical noise, seeking instead tranquility, they will find the Philokalia, or the way in the Philokalia too, particularly in this excellent selection of texts. Reaching the end of my brief comments, I now turn to another category of attendees. They are here, thank God. Who might wonder why I'm here instead of someplace else. Sure, Matt kindly introduced me as an expert of sorts. Thank you, sir. But most people who know something about me have by now formed the idea that I'm a science and religion scholar, which to an extent is true. What they might not know is that from my mid-teenage years, I have been consistently working on my spiritual transformation, guided by the Philokalia and related literature. I'm almost 60 next year, God willing, if I survive this trip to Melbourne and back. And that often my research publications address relevant matters either in part or in whole. I am too indeed a victim of the Philokalia and have no regrets about it. Regardless of how much trouble its revolutionary manifesto caused to me personally and in terms of my career. So there you have it. I talked about things that matter to me, about which I have more than an inkling, things that might bring to you too the troubles associated with personal change. As far as I'm concerned, this book is now launched. Congratulations once again to the translators. Many thanks to the organizers of this event for inviting me. Happy reading all. Thank you.
First of all, mulțumesc, Părinte.
Oh, cu piacere.
Yeah, that's Italian.
No. I'll go. That's all the Romanian I had. That was it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you certainly to Matt and to Julie, who organized this readings, for hosting us. It's hard to know where to begin after such a wonderfully fulsome, thoughtful, and unduly kind launch as that was. I'll keep it as brief as I can. Matt was not joking when he said that when I came here in 2017, the draft was underway. In fact, the draft was done in 2017. This began in 2014. It has been a long time. So I'm very grateful to all of you to sharing in this moment, which for me is as much about relief as anything else. This was a constant companion, sometimes a very good companion, sometimes a very frustrating companion for about 11 years. I should thank my daughter Zoe, who was very good about being in bed by 8:30 to 9 p.m. so that I could do the translation work between 9 p.m. and midnight most evenings after teaching during the day, which is how this came to be. Fortunately, Father Andrew corrected all my translations into something that is more like readable English, and we have him to thank for that. So it was quite a long process, and it's been a long time coming, and I'm grateful for it to be out. What we intended with this was certainly a new translation, something fresh, something a bit different. There is a translation of the whole Philokalia, which is absolutely massive. The whole Philokalia takes 5 very thick, very small printed volumes of about 400 pages each to get through. This is obviously not that. What we intended was not a new Philokalia, but a kind of invitation. That sampler platter you get at the restaurant that makes you think, oh, I want to try the entree now. I want to have the rest of the meal. And so they're representative texts. They're texts that effectively emerged from a conversation about what we both liked most in this. Out of the 67 texts of the Philokalia, what were the 20, originally 23, we just cut a bunch of them. What are the 20 that we liked most? And also from Father Andrew's perspective, he's obviously the more senior person. He's the kind of editor. From his perspective, what is the kind of core of the Philokalia? What on Mount Athos do they say you've got to have from this collection if you're going to make progress? And so rather than trying to reproduce, we thought we would take samples of things that had spoken to us and things that were received by the tradition as core, as simple. And that's what we've done. So it's 20, I can't even remember how many are in the, oh, they're not numbered, that's perfect, great. It's that many, I don't know, it's that many. It has been so long and so often I forget which ones we did and cut and which ones are in there, and well, it's all there for you to enjoy, I hope. I'm going to leave my response at that, which is mostly one of gratitude and relief and joy that this is out in the world and that I get to share it with so many people who have been so instrumental in making that possible and in putting up with me along the way, because I have no doubt that when I first came here, I was like, I've been translating the Philokalia, Matt. And you're like, yeah, Jonathan, I know. So thank you all very, very much. And thank you especially, Father Doru, for your very kind and thoughtful comments.
So we do now have a few minutes for questions. While we get situated for that, I will say there are copies of the book at the back in the volume 1. So on your way out, please do make sure to stop at the desk and pick up your own copy so that you too can become a victim of this book and join the club. Does anyone have a question as well? Hands are straight up. Yes, please.
I'm wondering how your translation differs or includes items from the Russian single volume that the Pilgrim used.
That is a great question. So this comes back to the way Penguin conceived of this. What Penguin wanted was actually a companion piece to another book called The Way of a Pilgrim, which is a lovely Russian story / allegory / manifesto for kind of Hezekiah's prayer and the Philokalia, which Father Andrew had overseen a new translation of that previously by the absolutely inimitable Anna Zaranko. And so they wanted this in relation. It is, in that sense, a companion piece to The Way of a Pilgrim, which is very much how that text, that story, it's the story of a man who gives up his kind of peasant life and goes to wander and pray the Jesus prayer, which is the short prayer at the heart of kind of the Hezekiah tradition, that tradition of serenity or stillness that is on display in the Philokalia, the short prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Repeated it over and over until it becomes a kind of interior heartbeat. He undertakes this, and as part of his journey, he meets an elder who says, oh, well, you've got to read the Philokalia, and does that. So in terms of like a textual relation, this is not exactly, there's no clear textual relation, but it is very much intended as a companion piece to that, because what the Philokalia is about, and I think you're talking about this, it's about it may be ascending the mountain, it may be the spiritual journey, but it is about the person who reads it being transformed. And it is a companion to that. People call it the Bible of Orthodox spirituality, and I don't care for that as much. The Bible is the Bible.
This is because the Orthodox don't read the Bible.
Oh yeah, I forgot we don't read the Bible. That's true. That's true. So if we don't read the Bible, we've got this. The Bible's easy. I mean, geez, this thing is. But it's always intended as a companion piece to the real work that is actually done in prayer, and that's what we wanted to open up. Does that answer your question?
Beautifully, thank you very much.
I think that's maybe a nice segue to another question. Bess, Jonathan, we discussed some about how you first came across the Philokalia and the way the pilgrim figures into that, I think. Do you want to say something a bit about how you first encountered this text?
Yeah, I encountered it, I think actually in a way that a lot of English speakers might first encounter it, which is thanks to J.D. Salinger. Yep, there's a nod. Yep, the great novella Franny and Zoo, where our character, Franny, she's at college, and she gets her hands on the pea green hardback, which is the 1950 or 1948 release, I forget, you can still find it in used bookstores, of The Way of a Pilgrim, this lovely little book. And she reads it, and she's like, I'm going to do that. So she starts doing the Jesus work, she starts doing Hezekiah, she starts doing the work of the Philokalia, and does what normal people do when they do that, and she has a nervous breakdown. And the rest of that novella is her brother, Zooey, kind of bringing her back to this more grounded, this more earthy life, right? So it's not exactly positive toward the work that is described in the Philokalia.
I mean, have you noticed that she doesn't say anything in the second half of the book? Because that's stillness, that's serenity, that's the actual Hezekiah's attitude.
All right, I like that. So she's actually coming to embody it, even as she's learning to shine her shoes for the fat man.
Yeah, and she puts up with all the
it's a phrase that makes a lot of sense.
philosophy that she got from her brother.
Oh, he's a
But she doesn't say anything.
Okay.
That's the best response to that kind of philosophy.
Well, okay, this is a much better reading than I had in college.
I know.
But suffice to say, I was like, well, I'm going to do what anybody who reads a book about someone having a nervous breakdown does, and go and try to do the same thing. And it was about the same time in college that a number of friends were kind of getting into the Orthodox Church. A number of my, strangely, I was not a religious college or anything like that, but 4 of the professors that I knew well were Orthodox. It was a very small college, so it was a bit surprising. But this all kind of came together to start reading the Philokalia. And someone gave me a copy of part of the existing English translation. They gave me volume 3. I don't know what you do starting with volume 3 of something that is hard enough starting at the beginning. So it was a strange introduction. And for what it's worth, I think I've met it 2 more times since then. The next time I met it, that was very different, was in graduate school, where it was part of my necessary reading. I've been reading in patristics with my supervisor, who was Father Andrew, and I was working forward, trying to get a handle on how ascetic theology dealt with death, especially in Greek patristic material, Greek early Christian material. So he put me on, so you've got to read the Philokalia, start working through that. It's got a lot of really important people in it. And so it became this kind of library of monastic or ascetic texts for me to read, very kind of part of my graduate studies, which is a way of encountering it too, as a kind of reference library. And then the third way was through translating, which gave me somewhat of a different perspective, and now I feel like I'm more interested in kind of those editors who want to be invisible, who aren't named. Like you said, Nicodemus and Macarius are not named because their job is not to be named. Their job is to be invisible, to receive, and just to bring together this chorus of voices, and to think of it as this kind of totality that isn't rigid, that isn't monolithic, but that is a kind of glorious harmony. And so I feel like I've met the Philokalia 3 different ways in 3 different Philokalias over the years, but it did begin with Salinger, yeah.
Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for fascinating presentation. And I wanted to know more about the readers of Philokalia. From which classes were them, and from which regions of Byzantium, and maybe neighboring countries?
Sure. So when the Philokalia is being put together, Nicodemus talks about this in his introduction. He says, people were telling me, don't publish this. Don't bring it out of the manuscripts into print. Print's dangerous because anybody can get their hands on a printed book. I mean, they only printed like 100 copies, so I think that's a bit exaggerated. But still. He says it's for everyone. And actually, that is something that you find in some of the later texts. This is for everyone, not just for monks or nuns, not just for priests or bishops, it's for everyone. And so, in a way, that means everyone who can read, but it also means anyone who can have it read to them. It means someone like the anonymous peasant in The Way of a Pilgrim, who is hardly some elite person. So it's intended for everyone. Now, the Greek version, when it comes out, is not widely read. As you noted, it gets there eventually, but it's never really been that popular in Greece as far as I can tell. Yeah. It takes off in Romania, thanks to people like Paisi, St. Paisi, absolutely. I mean, Ukraine, I know we call him Ukrainian monk. He's buried now in monastery.
In Romania.
In Romania, I know.
Well, they didn't have places for graves in Ukraine for the time.
Oh, okay. Oh, fair enough.
In anticipation of more recent events.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, that's a good reminder. Okay. But fair. All right. So we have it taking off in Romania, in Russia eventually. It's actually not even that quick. But it actually builds thanks to the movement of Russian theologians out through France after the Russian Revolution. Because as the school of Zecher in Paris, a lot of the intellectuals there are bringing it into French. And so you see French translations. And then it gets into English translations, thanks to people like now St. Sophronia of Essex, who takes the Jesus Prayer to a little monastery because he couldn't afford service books. So they just did the Jesus Prayer 2 hours a day. And this becomes a spiritual center in the United Kingdom. And then from there, thanks to people like Callistos Ware, to the English-speaking world. So now it's a global phenomenon. Truly global in the sense that English carries it to a global audience. But it's meant for everybody. And over time, its fortunes have waxed and waned, but it's gotten around the world. Yeah.
I would say the fact that we're having this conversation in Australia is evidence that it has gotten around the world. Other questions from the audience?
I have one.
Yeah.
In the introduction to the, I guess the English translation that I'm used to reading, it does make a point, and this was actually something that shook me when I wasn't too, I suppose, invested in the faith, because I'm an Orthodox Christian. It says very clearly, like, the text is not, I suppose, supposed to be approached and read outside the church. That is to say that it is a holistic kind of approach to the faith and the spiritual life. And I'm just wondering, like, perhaps obviously the endeavors here might be different, as you say. It's a selection intended to invite people. But how is this, I guess, addressed or brought up?
It's a great question. Would you like to speak to that at all?
Yeah. But you have to take over.
I
Well, isn't this the destiny of any book? Once it's printed, it's in the open. So I don't think the question is applicable to the Philokalia or as to whether we translate and print it in, I don't know, more than 100 copies. Yeah, this one.
yeah.
Actually, this was a hit. And so the thing is that's the destiny of books. You cannot expect only people from the community that generated that literature to visit it or ignore it, as most Orthodox do. The thing is, I know what you're saying, but in the original introduction, which happily Jonathan and Father Andrew translated, because it's missing in the classical
This is Nicodemus's,
1979. Yeah, it's Nicodemus's manifesto, if you like. He explains why, perhaps reluctantly, but he had to publish this. It's because no one at the time knew of it. Among the Orthodox, they were just going to the liturgy and going through the motions and all that. And there was everything about the externals and nothing for the transformation of the inner being. And this is the risk that the editors took, and these translators too, to put the book in the hands of whoever wants to do something about their own life.
I mean, I think I could put it better. I think that's really true. I think it's easy to want to say this is our thing, You know, you can't understand it if you're not part of this. And I think, I'm sure that St. Nicodemus and St. Macarius would agree that it's best read and best employed as part of a rhythm of life that is defined by liturgy and fast and feast and all those other kind of intersecting rhythms that make this prayer possible. But it's also true that people well outside of that, people like Salinger, right, who is definitely not Orthodox, I think pretty agnostic, they derive great benefit from it. People have found it wonderful coming from other religious traditions too, which has been really cool. There's a lot of studies, like Philokalic spirituality and Buddhism, or Sufi mysticism. And I have seen people find in this resources for their spiritual lives, whether they're Orthodox, whether they're Christian, or otherwise. And so there is a sense in which, yes, it's great if it's part of a certain kind of holistic life, but it may be part of another kind of whole life. And all our lives are whole lives in a way.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah, James.
Well, maybe extending from your answer just now, Jonathan, is there anything you want to say about potential Christian unity coming from the Philokalia?
That's a great question, and I genuinely appreciate that. It's a difficult one to answer. I'm tempted just to hand you the microphone again.
Okay, and you take over again.
Okay.
Because you're always responding better than I do. That's usually what.
This is really why we got him to say such nice things to me.
I know my limitations, Jonathan. This is, I call it a guide. And it's a guide towards ourselves. And I assume that this is what would make it an ecumenical kind of experience or experiment, if you like. A bridge towards unity, because ultimately, let's not forget that, at least for the time being, we are not blended with the AI thing, and we are still part of the same species. Insofar as we are still human, we have the same nature, and then, we have the same problems. And most times is the fact that we live on the outskirts of ourselves and never meeting ourselves. And this is what makes, for example, room too much, from my viewpoint, for the interpretation of diversity as divergence and antagonism and exclusion. Yeah. Whereas if we would look inside and see what hesychasm is about, see the imprint of God in us and in everyone, then that's a starting point for a very ecumenical, very Catholic, let me use this word with a small c. As in etymologically, yeah? All encompassing, where each part is in accordance to the whole. This is what Catholic means in Aristotle. Yeah? Each part, each of us, reflects on a personal level the whole of humanity. Well, if we undertake this journey under the guidance of the Philokalia indoors, then we will find ourselves and we will find each other. And that's, by definition, the way towards a true ecumenical, transcending boundaries, and so on and so forth, experiment. So that's me. And I think there's a lot of value there. Well, yeah. No, go.
Oh, I don't think I have anything to add to that. That's, yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, well, one last quick question.
Coming back to J.D. Salinger, a creative writer, I was brought to Philokalia through his novel, and to me it seems like he's captured the spirit and the ethos of the whole 5 volumes. Do you have any more information you can share on that in terms of Salinger's relationship with Philokalia, and like what seems to be getting it so right, especially in the second half of the book with the male character?
I wish I did. I mean, I've read a lot of other Salinger, and that's the only time that I would find this not just explicitly mentioned, but I think of his other works. They're very different in many ways. Not bad. I mean, I quite like them all, but I mean, I think of, I don't know. It's a great question, and I don't personally have a great answer for you. I wish Father Andrew were here. He'd be all in Salinger. But do you have?
Well, I think just continuing what I said earlier, there's something that we shouldn't dismiss in the structure of the book itself. So the first part, Franny is seeking. She reads something that she stumbled on something that is so surprising. She never found anything of that sort in the library. And she's seeking. Of course, she has some moment of crisis because of the novelty of what she stumbled on. But I think this actually corresponds to what happens to most of us when we begin this kind of journey under the guidance of the Philokalia. Because first of all, it's the old me. Why should I relinquish everything and do this or that? Because that's what everything boils down to, and then, but Salinger got the right point. Look at the serenity of Franny. In the second part of the book, she listens. Most times she seems not to be listening at all, being absorbed in prayer, and that's the spirit of the Philokalia. Not to ignore the rest of humanity, but to understand what actually matters, and blah, 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 which is the second part of the book. All sorts of summaries of philosophical systems and religious ideas, very interesting. Something like Philip K. Dick in the Valis, whatever cycle, lots of Gnostic and all that, philosophy. And Franny, because she discovered something better.
Thank you.
I think that question again tells us that so many people over the years have come across this book through Salinger, and I'm confident that thanks to this new translation, there will be many more friends now.
Viva la revolución.
I think we should probably wrap it up there. I'm the only thing standing between you and food and libations. So we will go next door to the notes, and please do join us if you're able. But please join me first in one last round of applause to congratulate Jonathan on this wonderful achievement.
Thank you again, Matt, and thank you, Father Doru. And thank you also, Lawrence.
Oh no, that's fine. We were thrilled actually.
And of course, the best way to convert a rejection is by copy, and I'm sure that it's a needy sign.